The massive transport ship cut through the void, its alien hull gleaming under the distant starlight. Commander Jiwoo Park sat rigidly in his observation chair, reviewing the standard planetary assessment documents for Terra Prime Military Academy. His species had conducted thousands of similar reconnaissance missions, but something about this particular assignment felt different. The holographic display flickered with images of the planet's terrain, rocky, unpredictable, with atmospheric conditions that would crush most galactic species. Dong-yuk, his junior research assistant, nervously adjusted the communication panels. "Commander," Dong-yuk whispered, "the human transmission signals are unusual." Jiwoo raised a thin eyebrow. Unusual was an understatement. The communication patterns were complex, layered with multiple communication channels that seemed to overlap and intertwine in ways his species had never encountered. As their ship descended through Terra Prime's atmosphere, the first signs of the planet's brutal environment became apparent. Extreme temperature variations, dense gravitational pressures, and atmospheric compositions that would instantly kill most known intelligent life forms seemed almost mundane here. The landing zone appeared deceptively simple, a massive training complex built into a rocky mountain range, surrounded by terrain that looked like it had been deliberately engineered to challenge any living creature. Sharp volcanic rocks, unpredictable wind patterns, and temperature ranges that fluctuated between freezing and scorching within minutes. A human representative waited. Hyun Kim, dressed in a standard military uniform that seemed more like protective gear than traditional clothing, stood completely still. No signs of environmental stress, no protective additional layers, just calm, calculated presence. "Welcome to Terra Prime," Hyun said, his voice steady and direct. No formalities, no diplomatic pleasantries, just a statement of existence. Jiwoo's initial assessment protocols began scanning. The human's body temperature, muscle responses, respiratory patterns, everything was different. Where his own species would require multiple environmental suits and complex life support systems, this human stood naturally in conditions that would destroy most advanced civilizations. The training ground behind Hyun looked more like a planetary warfare simulation than a traditional military academy. Recruits moved through terrains that shifted rapidly, from Arctic-like environments to desert-like landscapes, all within visible distance. They carried equipment that seemed to adapt instantly to changing conditions. A group of young recruits ran past, carrying equipment that weighed what would be considered impossible for most species. Their movements were fluid, precise, almost machine-like in efficiency, yet distinctly organic. No signs of strain, no visible stress. Just pure, calculated movement. Dong-hyuk's monitoring equipment began registering data that made no sense. Recruit heart rates remained stable despite extreme physical exertion. Oxygen consumption patterns defied known biological limitations. Muscle response times were milliseconds faster than any recorded galactic species. "Would you like a demonstration?" Hyun asked, not waiting for a response. Before Jiwoo could process the question, a simulation began. Recruits were suddenly immersed in a scenario that combined multiple environmental challenges: low oxygen, high gravity, unpredictable terrain, and simultaneous combat simulation. What happened next would forever change Jiwoo's understanding of military potential. Recruits didn't just survive the simulation, they transformed it, using environmental challenges as tactical advantages, communicating through complex but instantaneous methods, adapting faster than any computational system Jiwoo had ever witnessed. A young recruit noticed Jiwoo watching. Instead of displaying nervousness or showing off, she simply nodded, a gesture of acknowledgement that felt more like a challenge than a greeting. Jiwoo realized something profound in that moment. This wasn't just a military training ground. This was a laboratory of evolution, a place where human potential was being continuously tested, pushed, and expanded. The rocky terrain of Terra Prime was not just a location. It was a crucible, continuously forging something beyond traditional understanding of military capability. As the first day of observation concluded, Jiwoo Park understood one thing with absolute clarity. Everything he knew about military potential was about to be rewritten. The simulation chamber hummed with quiet anticipation. Hyun Kim stood beside Ji-woo, his posture relaxed but alert. The room itself was a marvel of engineering. Walls that could transform into any imaginable terrain, environmental controls that could simulate extreme conditions in milliseconds. Recruits filed in, their movements synchronized yet individually unique. No two moved exactly the same, but they moved as a single organism. Ji-woo noticed something strange. Each recruit seemed to carry an internal rhythm, a sense of awareness that extended beyond individual perception. "Watch closely," Hyun said. Quietly, the chamber transformed. One moment it was a flat desert landscape, the next a dense mountain terrain with near vertical surfaces. Visibility dropped to near zero. Wind simulation created sound patterns that would disorient most species. The recruits didn't just adapt, they merged with the environment. A young recruit named Yoonji took point. Her movement was liquid, almost formless. Where another species might struggle, she flowed through the challenging terrain like water finding its natural path. Her breathing remained steady, her heart rate unchanged despite the extreme physical demand. Computational systems tracked their performance. Ji-woo's monitoring equipment began registering data that defied standard biological understanding. Muscle response times were beyond theoretical limits. Oxygen consumption patterns suggested these humans were rewriting the basic rules of physical endurance. A complex sound burst through the chamber, a signal that would have completely disoriented any other species. The recruits didn't just hear it, they used it. Each recruit instantaneously adjusted position, creating a living, breathing tactical network that responded faster than any computer could process. Dong-hyuk, observing from the side, couldn't believe his sensors. "This is impossible," he whispered. Hyun simply smiled. "Nothing is impossible. There are only limitations we haven't overcome yet." The simulation escalated. Environmental challenges increased exponentially. Temperature dropped to levels that would freeze biological systems. Gravity increased, making movement a constant battle against crushing force. Oxygen levels reduced to minimal survival rates. The recruits transformed. Yoonji and her team didn't just survive. They strategized. Where another species would collapse, they found advantage. Low oxygen became a tactical opportunity. Increased gravity became a method of conserving energy. Each challenge was not a problem to overcome, but a resource to exploit. Young male recruit named Min broke formation, not as a mistake but as a calculated risk. His movement created a tactical opening that his teammates instantly understood and utilized. No verbal communication, just pure instinctive understanding. Ji-woo's understanding of military potential began to crack. This wasn't training. This was evolution in real time. The simulation reached its peak, an environment that would destroy. Most advanced species became a playground of human potential. Recruits moved, adapted, transformed. Their bodies were not just biological systems. They were living, breathing, computational networks. Hyun turned to Ji-woo. "What do you see?" Ji-woo struggled to find words. What he saw defied every standard of military understanding. These weren't just soldiers. They were something more, a species that didn't just adapt to challenges but fundamentally reimagined them. As the simulation concluded, the recruits showed no signs of stress, no heavy breathing, no muscle fatigue. They looked like they had just completed a casual walk, not survived an environment designed to destroy. Yoonji caught Ji-woo's eye and gave a slight nod. It wasn't a gesture of victory. It was a statement of simple, fundamental truth. This is what humans do. Dong-hyuk's monitoring equipment continued recording, but the data seemed almost meaningless. Traditional metrics of performance, endurance, and survival had become obsolete. The chamber returned to its neutral state. But something had changed. Ji-woo understood that he wasn't just observing a military training ground. He was witnessing the continuous redefinition of what it means to be a living, thinking, adapting species. The technology wing of Terra Prime, Military Academy, looked nothing like what Ji-woo expected. It wasn't a sterile laboratory or a clean, organized research center. Instead, it resembled a living, breathing ecosystem of innovation. Hyun Kim led him through corridors that seemed to pulse with potential. Walls weren't just walls. They were adaptive surfaces that could transform based on immediate technological needs. Screens flickered with complex data streams that moved like living organisms, constantly shifting, adapting, predicting. A young engineer named Ji-Soo worked on what appeared to be a standard weapon system. But standard was the wrong word. The weapon literally reshaped itself as she touched it, molecular structures realigning with each movement of her hand. One moment it looked like a precision rifle, the next a compact defense system. Our technology doesn't just serve a purpose, Hyun explained. It thinks, it adapts. Dong-Yuk's monitoring equipment went crazy. The weapon was changing its fundamental composition faster than any known technological system could process. Metals merged, circuit patterns rewrote themselves, adaptive algorithms created solutions, before problems even emerged. A demonstration began. A simulation room showed a complex battlefield scenario. Recruits entered with seemingly standard equipment. Within moments, their gear began to change. Armor that adjusted to specific environmental threats, communication devices that predicted tactical movements before they happened. Ji-Woo watched in disbelief. This wasn't just technology. This was a living system of human potential. A holographic display showed multiple technological development streams. Most impressive was how quickly humans transformed theoretical concepts into practical applications. Where other species would take decades, humans completed revolutionary developments in months. Ji-Soo noticed Ji-Woo's confusion and smiled. Technology is just another language, she said simply. We don't create tools. We have a conversation with potential. The weapon she had been working on suddenly transformed again. It was no longer just a weapon. It was a multifunctional system that could analyze, predict, defend, and communicate. Its molecular structure contained more computational power than entire alien research facilities. Another section of the technology wing focused on biological integration. Recruits wore equipment that wasn't just worn, it was connected. Adaptive systems that read muscle movements, predicted physical stress, and enhanced human capabilities in real time. A training simulation showed a recruit's suit literally changing, its protective capabilities based on millisecond environmental shifts. Where another species would require multiple specialized suits, humans created a single adaptive system. Hyun walked to a complex computational center. We don't just use technology, he explained. We understand it as an extension of human creativity. The computational system was unlike anything Ji-Woo had seen. Traditional alien technologies followed strict, predictable patterns. This system was organic, chaotic, beautiful. It didn't just process information, it imagined possibilities. Dong-Hyuk's sensors showed something remarkable. The technological systems were learning, not just processing. Each interaction created new potential, new understanding. It was less like a machine and more like a living, breathing organism. A massive screen showed global technological development, streams. Ji-Woo saw something shocking. Humans were developing technologies in multiple fields simultaneously. Medical breakthroughs happening alongside military innovations, environmental solutions merging with computational advances. We don't see boundaries, Hyun said, watching Ji-Woo's reaction. Where others see limitations, we see opportunities. The most disturbing revelation wasn't the technology itself. It was the human approach. They didn't just create technology, they had a relationship with it. Each device, each system was a potential waiting to be understood, not just a tool to be used. Ji-Woo realized something profound. This wasn't just a technological research center. This was a window into human potential, a species that didn't just adapt to technology, but reimagined what technology could be. As they left the wing, a young recruit walked past, her equipment shifting and adapting with each step. She didn't even notice. For her, this was normal. For Ji-Woo, it was a glimpse into a future he had never imagined possible. The interview room was simple, almost bare. Jiwoo expected complex technological interfaces, but there was just a plain table, 2 chairs, and Hyun Kim sitting across from him with an expression that revealed nothing and everything. "Tell me about survival," Hyun said. Not a question, a statement. Jiwoo realized this wasn't going to be a standard debriefing. Something deeper was happening. The walls seemed to absorb tension, creating a space that felt more like a philosophical arena than an interview room. Hyun began sharing stories. Not military reports or tactical information, but human experiences. A grandmother who survived multiple economic collapses. A child who rebuilt a community after a natural disaster. Stories that weren't about individual heroism, but collective, human resilience. Humans don't just survive, Hyun explained. We transform challenges into opportunities. Each story revealed a pattern. Where other species would break, humans would reimagine their entire existence. Survival wasn't just about physical endurance, but psychological reconstruction. Dong-hyuk recorded everything, his monitoring equipment struggling to capture the nuanced psychological information. The data streams looked more like complex emotional landscapes than traditional research metrics. A holographic display showed human historical progression. Most species, when facing existential challenges, would either collapse or become aggressive. Humans did something entirely different. They innovated, adapted, and grew. Jiwoo saw something remarkable. Human psychology wasn't a fixed system. It was a dynamic, fluid environment of constant transformation. Fear wasn't something to be eliminated, but a resource to be understood and utilized. Hyun shared a training philosophy that shocked Jiwoo. "We don't train soldiers," he said. "We cultivate adaptable humans who understand that conflict is just another form of problem solving." The psychological training modules were unlike anything in galactic records. Recruits weren't just taught combat skills. They were taught emotional intelligence, cultural understanding, complex communication strategies. A soldier was more than a weapon. They were a living, thinking diplomatic system. A young recruit named Seo-yeon demonstrated a psychological resilience test. Placed in a simulation of extreme psychological stress, she didn't just endure. She analyzed, understood, and transformed the experience into a learning opportunity. "Conflict is information," Seo-yeon explained. "Not an enemy to defeat, but a conversation to understand." Jiwoo's understanding of military psychology began to crumble. This wasn't about defeating an opponent. This was about understanding complex systems of human interaction. The most shocking revelation came when Hyun explained how they trained emotional responses. Traditional military systems suppressed emotions. Humans did the opposite. They trained emotional intelligence as a strategic advantage. Dong-hyuk's sensors showed something unprecedented. The recruits' brain patterns during stress scenarios weren't about survival. They were about continuous learning, about seeing challenges as opportunities for growth. A series of psychological profiles showed how humans transformed personal trauma into collective strength. Where other species would be destroyed by challenging experiences, humans would use them as fuel for innovation. "We don't have weaknesses," Hyun said quietly. "We have unexplored strengths." The interview wasn't just an assessment. It was a philosophical exploration of human potential. Jiwoo realized he wasn't just observing a military training ground. He was witnessing the continuous evolution of a species that refused to be defined by limitations. Seo-yeon demonstrated a meditation technique that was simultaneously a tactical analysis method. Calm wasn't about avoiding conflict. It was about creating a mental space for strategic thinking. As the interview concluded, Jiwoo understood something profound. Human psychology wasn't a system to be studied. It was a living, breathing universe of potential waiting to be explored. The room felt different now. Not just a space for an interview, but a window into a species that didn't just survive challenges. They reimagined what was possible with each breath, each thought, each moment of human experience. Hyun's final words lingered in the air. "We are not defined by what happens to us. We are defined by how we choose to respond." The Galactic Communication Center hummed with quiet intensity. Commander Jiwoo Park sat alone, his fingers hovering over the holographic report interface. Everything he knew about interstellar species was about to change. Donghyuk watched nervously from the side, understanding the weight of this moment. This wasn't just a standard reconnaissance report. This was a potential rewriting of galactic understanding. Jiwoo began typing. His first words were careful, measured. Humanity is not a species to be categorized. They are a living, evolving system of potential. The report wasn't a typical military assessment. It was more like a philosophical revelation. Each paragraph peeled back layers of human complexity that defied standard galactic classification. He described the Terra Prime Military Academy not as a training ground, but as a laboratory of human evolution. The technological innovations, the psychological adaptations, the fundamental approach to survival, everything was different. Memories flooded back. Yoonji moving through impossible terrain. Jisoo's adaptive weapon systems. Seo Yun's psychological resilience. Each recruit was a universe of potential, not just a soldier. The computational systems around him began analyzing the report in real time. Traditional algorithms struggled to process the information. Humans didn't fit into standard predictive models. Donghyuk noticed something unusual. The report was changing as Jiwoo wrote, adapting, revealing deeper layers of understanding. It was becoming a living document, not just a static report. Recommendation 1, Jiwoo typed, immediate diplomatic engagement. Approach with respect, not as potential adversaries but as a species with unprecedented evolutionary potential. He described their technological approach. Humans didn't just create tools. They had a relationship with technology, seeing it as an extension of human creativity. Each innovation was a conversation, not a product. The psychological section was the most challenging to articulate. How do you describe a species that transforms challenges into opportunities? A culture that sees conflict as a form of complex communication? Memories of Hyun Kim's words echoed. We are not defined by what happens to us. We are defined by how we choose to respond. Jiwoo realized the report was becoming more than an official document. It was a warning, a celebration, a recognition of something extraordinary. Caution is not enough, he wrote. Humans represent a fundamental shift in understanding of intelligent life. The galactic communication systems began to alert various diplomatic channels. This was not a standard report. This was a potential paradigm shift. Donghyuk watched the report generate complex predictive models. Traditional alien systems showed multiple conflict scenarios. Human potential models showed something entirely different. Endless adaptation, continuous growth. Jiwoo described the recruits not as soldiers, but as living systems of potential. Their training wasn't about creating weapons, but about cultivating adaptable, thinking humans who saw challenges as opportunities. The technological innovations defied understanding. Weapons that thought, suits that predicted, communication systems that anticipated before action. It wasn't technology. It was an extension of human creativity. He included psychological profiles that showed something remarkable. Where other species would break, humans would reimagine their entire existence. Survival wasn't just physical. It was a constant process of growth and understanding. The final recommendation was clear. Engage, learn, understand. As the report finalized, something unusual happened. The communication systems began generating additional insights, as if the document itself was continuing to evolve. Donghyuk watched in amazement. This wasn't just a report about humans. This was humans, adaptive, unpredictable, constantly growing. Jiwoo looked up, a mix of excitement and concern in his eyes. We've discovered something more than a species, he said quietly. We've discovered a living system of potential. The report was complete, but something told Jiwoo this was just the beginning of understanding humanity.